Good morning. It's 10:35 on Friday, June 20th or 10th, excuse me. And I call to order the ad hoc budget committee. Could we have roll call, please?
Ford, Gums, Caius, Leonard,
Leonard here.
Surges,
Surges here.
Pepe,
Debbie here.
Berman,
Berman's here.
Bureau. Here.
So we do have a
Quorum.
quorum. We need to approve our minutes from our previous meeting.
Leonard moves.
Leonard moves.
Surges second.
Surges second. Any changes or discussion or whatever? Roll call, please.
Ford, Gums, Caius, Leonard,
Leonard, yes.
Surges,
Surges, yes.
Pepe,
Yes.
Berman.
Berman, yes.
Yes.
Any public comments? Not aware of any here. Any online? Presentations. Item A of finance. And I don't see anybody from our finance department. I think this is a general fund forecast, which we saw previously, as I recall. So if we want to review it or anything, I guess the most important thing is we were talking about a revenue and budget forecast for the next 3 years. But I guess the net of it all is a revenue shortfall of anticipated of 5 million in 2023. And
I have, if I may.
yes, Madam Chair.
Thank you. I was at a meeting yesterday and I was made aware that our utility costs are going to be at least doubled, if not more, for next year. So those rates, do not have those numbers, but we can factor that in as well. Is just something to keep everyone's attention to.
Mhm.
Chairman Berman,
Yes, Surges.
Surges here. I had a couple of phone calls earlier that this is just a procedural deal, but I was able to get the email and click on the link and get to it, but I'm told that it wasn't, that the agenda and any attachments were not posted on the website again. Are we still struggling with that?
The attachments are, it's a working committee. So as we're getting through these, we're doing and handing out. Do you want all this information that has not yet been determined as public knowledge?
And that's not a question for me. I'm just saying that
And
something as simple
that's-
as an agenda wasn't available to the
I
public.
thought
Oh, the
was
agenda, the
there.
agenda should have.
Agenda was there.
Online?
The agenda was there, but there was no agenda
No backup.
packet.
No
No.
attachments.
No.
I checked like at 9 o'clock this morning.
Yeah, I had phone calls last night. And I said, I don't know. I clicked on mine and it was
That-
there. I don't know. what
That
to tell you.
most of the information was available to us in other emails.
I'm not worried about us.
Okay.
I'm worried about others looking in
Absolutely.
and so.
Oh,
And, and
I was
and I
looking
only
in and
bring
I
that up
couldn't
because I
find it.
seem to be Karen's nemesis on this. And we,
Yeah,
Just the agenda.
3 days ago.
Mhm.
Perfect.
she did what she was supposed to do very well.
I'm
And,
not-
and so is that the only, and just so for my edification, is that the only requirement? Like are attachments supposed to be there or, I mean,
We have
when
a-
somebody calls me, what do I say?
The state's attorney is right there.
Michelle? What do we, so if, when things are posted, I'm so sorry, when things are, catch you off guard. When things are posted online, is our responsibility just to post the agenda? Or the items that are supposed to have attachments, should that be posted for the public to see? What do you tell somebody when they call? And I'm not advocating either way, I just want to know.
Pursuant to the Pursuant to the Open Meetings Act, you just have to reasonably apprise everyone of the subject matter to be discussed and voted on.
The agenda is fine.
So the agenda is absolutely fine.
Perfect.
Yes, legally
you.
speaking.
Chairman. Mr. Chairman, my point that I would like to make, piggybacking on Mr. Surgis's concern for other people, is when we have a meeting and we have an agenda and there are attachments that we need to study and evaluate before we can discuss and or vote on it, I think it's important that we try to have those 48 hours before so we have time to review those. To review those at the meeting and read these and not be able to study them and evaluate them, I think is a disservice to the committee. And I've asked in the past if we could always have things 48 hours before the meeting. I understand timeframes make it difficult, but in situations where we're dealing with a lot of different figures and financials and everything else, we really do need time to study it before the meeting to be able to discuss it intelligently.
And when, I think some of these attachments we've received, the equity adjustments were done on Wednesday, I believe, and those were sent out. The property code enforcement probably was sent out.
We did both of those. We met on Wednesday and as late Wednesday as 8 PM at night on Wednesday, but I did try and forward those out to the entire committee and offer if anybody would like to call me, here's my cell phone. And I did receive phone calls on it.
And the Safety Act capital compliance, that was sent out. Roger completed that. I think that was done on Wednesday as well. So they're moving quickly on this. A lot of information.
I'm saying in reference to future meetings, if we could somehow get
Absolutely.
these things out about 48 hours before, I would appreciate it personally.
As we're all trying to get that done. Yeah, absolutely.
Yes, sir.
Shepro.
Yep, Rose.
I mean, there's always a good reason why things are at the last minute, but they're always at the last minute. And we said months ago, we talked about 48 hours. And every time there's a good reason apparently why we can't meet the 48 hours. And even if the committee got things, the rest of us that have some interest in even why there is this committee in the first place, don't have any information. I mean, and to that point, I guess as an outsider, I am puzzled. As far as I could tell, the special budget committee is the same as the finance committee, except that 2 of the finance committee members are not on this committee and 2 people who are not on the finance committee are on the committee. But it can't be that this is more efficient because there's still 8 people. So I guess I'm puzzled as to what is the mission of this committee that couldn't be handled under our regular committee structure that has been in place. And what is there a special mission of this committee? And is this committee report to whom? I would assume to the finance committee.
Should be the
To the
finance.
finance
Finance
committee.
committee. I think we needed some preliminary discussion, whether it could have been the entire finance committee, that's fine. I think we have, when it added someone other than the finance committee, but I think the big thing is for all of us to get on the same thing and see what our requirements are, see what our needs are. And we need to make a decision quickly or soon on whether or not we're going to go out for a referendum. So I think that's basically, I think now is.
To that point, Mr. Chair, my understanding is at the Wednesday meeting, there were numbers presented that I think were essentially presented at the last minute, about which there was some discussion that there was an enormous discrepancy in what some people thought the numbers were and what was presented. And that's exactly why you don't want to have stuff handed out at the last minute.
Yeah.
So if I can just make a comment to follow up on both of yours. So from what I'm hearing from both of you, from Mr. Leonard and Mr. Shepro, if we were to direct our staff to put together a report. And if it does not make that 48-hour deadline for your perusal, that report would be held back to the following meeting to make sure that you would have enough time, even though it would be ready for a meeting, you would prefer to have it held back so that you would have the 48-hour window to review.
That would be ideal with me.
I think
Madam
so.
Chair.
Yes,
think
I-
that'd
All
be
right,
great.
very good, very good. We can certainly accommodate that. And that accommodation then, if, certainly for this committee, but if this is something that as a board, you would like to have that happen, we may have to, you realize that then those reports may have to be pushed back for another full month to a following meeting. So
No.
if we're going to do for one, we would do
I mean,
for all.
there are alternatives. If it really is urgent, then you can have a special meeting
Yes.
if need be. But
True.
so much of what we get is worthwhile, substantive, important information. And not everybody, Mr. Leonard can probably digest it instantaneously, but the rest of us are not as gifted. And more seriously, I think it is a policy that we announced, or a semi-policy that was announced months ago. And I can just think of so many times where the committees are meeting and struggling with something that they have just been given. And frankly, I think it's a disservice to staff that they are rushing to complete something and then they don't get the benefit of their work because we're trying to read it as we're sitting at the table.
It's fine, it's fine.
Mr. Leonard.
Mr. Chairman, I do have one other concern too. At our last meeting, we received the projections for the next 3 years
Mhm.
from Erica Wagner. And during the meeting, I had asked for some clarification and itemization on things, and I have not gotten anything yet. So at this point, we're no better off than we were at the last meeting. My major concern was the fact that from the projections given from Erica, and I'm sure she did a very fine job on it, it looks like our revenues are going to go down about $7 million in 2023. And I don't see how that can happen, especially when we consider the fact that in 21, our audit revealed that we had an additional $11.3 million of revenue, which wasn't put into the 22 budget. So I think that 7 million deficit in total revenue for 23 could be off as much as 18 to 20 million. And I need clarification on that before I can make any decisions on whether or not that is correct or what figures we need to evaluate before we move forward on anything.
Okay.
And that's a kind of a large consideration.
Okay, Madam Chair.
I would agree with that. I didn't know if she was responding to you individually.
She didn't, after the
think-
meeting, I spoke with her and told her what I wanted. There were about 3 or 4 specific areas I needed itemization on. She said, I'll get it to you. I haven't gotten it. So, unfortunately, I don't know how we can move forward on this until we get things defined specifically and accurately.
Oh, I would absolutely would agree.
And just to, if I can, Mr. Chairman, Sturgis, if I can jump in, I thought she was going to be, we have an unusual set of circumstances this week that I think we're all aware of, and one of them includes, while the loss of a loved one, we also had somebody that was on vacation, and that's pretty tough to get us all the information. But back to Ken's, question or comment, it's really tough to move forward without the data. But in my perception for today is there was no way we were going to possibly have that data. And I thought we were here to introduce 2 or 3 new things just to throw into the mix, but no action would be taken. That's just my perception.
Leonard.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Sturgis, with respect to that, I specifically spoke to Ms. Wagner after the meeting, told her what I needed, and she said, I am going on vacation, but I will get it to you so you have it to evaluate. I'm not blaming her. I'm not saying she's at fault or because of the other circumstances, that isn't understandable. I'm just saying, at this point, it's such a major consideration. I can't move forward on anything with respect to funding the Safety Act until we get these numbers correct. And I think once Mr. Onsick is back, we can get it cleared up in an hour.
And Bill, just, I mean, I respect you immensely and don't take my comments as defending somebody's action because I equally had questions that you're aware of regarding the sales tax items and, you know, how do I take an omnibus version of that and break it down to some components that would help me rationalize it. And I did not receive those either. So
You did not?
I did not.
Well,
I don't know that any of this, Shepro, is directed at a complaint about staff.
No,
I
no.
think it's just
No.
the reality.
Just the
is
reality. Exactly.
that
That's exactly
Oh.
it.
I think our idea was we set the date for the meeting and I was in hopes that we would get information that we needed.
But I stand absolutely prepared to present the other items.
Good. That's what we want to hear. There's a
Mr.
question
Chair?
from,
Mr. Chair?
Ms. Molina, and she wants us to, wants to be sent this document, that we're working with. Well, it's all been, we've all had it already. It's already been sent to us. Now, it wasn't sent under the caption of this meeting, but the data that we were working with has all been sent to all of us.
Hey, IT guys, is there any way we can see who's in the chat room or online or whatever you call that thing?
Guys.
Perfect. That really, I mean, if we can see the all, that would be great. Sorry for not knowing your names. I apologize.
If you want to turn off the agenda and just go full screen, like.
That's fine.
Yep, you don't-
Toggle between
you
the
don't
two
need
so
to-
we
there's
know
really
who's
not
here.
that
and who's
much
not.
on the
Yeah, just
agenda,
stop
so.
sharing for now.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
Tepe here. I've been quiet for a while, which is strange for me, I know. But I wanted to jump in and say, I don't think we're anywhere near ready to make any kind of decision. So the fact that numbers aren't here today don't bother me at all. I have the information that I received from Mr. Surges. Wanted to let Mr. Shepro know that I'm completely ready to move forward and understand the rest of this detail. Okay? So based upon that, I'd like to see us get moving rather than discuss what we don't have.
Good enough. Well, let's go to B, Human Resources.
Okay. With the, does everybody have their packet in front of them or had reviewed it?
I have.
I just want to give a couple of background pieces for this. This information is for 223 employees of the county that the county board controls. This is not, these are not employees of the county-wide offices. These are non-union employees because the union employees are covered by CBAs. The comparative analysis that was used for these 223 employees was based off of McHenry and Lake, which is what we felt were the nearest comparables based on a plethora of criteria. Of the 223, 108 employees do not require an equity adjustment. 115 require an adjustment, including 6 department heads. However, the numbers that you see highlighted below do not include the department heads. And the $498,000 per year adjustment is, I'm going to stumble and bumble a bit through this, but we didn't do this arbitrarily and say, here's a flat amount to raise. We ranked everything and you have the backup data behind it saying, based on that matrix, who was the furthest differentiator and who was the closest differentiator. And we tried to come up with a step program that said those were at a 25% differentiator really needed to be caught up quicker than those at, say, a 5% differentiator. And so what you have in front of you is a 3-year plan, bringing salary ranges within the threshold that we had set forth. The highlighted numbers that you see at the 5%, 3% and comparables do not include a COLA increase. So the spreadsheet that we put together is pure. Whatever COLA adjustment is mandated for that year would need to be added. It's not included in here. I wanted to make special note that on the bigger package that we're looking at, we went out of our way to come up with a matrix of comparable counties. And we felt McHenry and Lake, based on size, population, blah, 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 blah. We noticed that on some of the other matrix that were put together, it seemed a bit selective and random to me as to how they were being compared. So one group may have compared themselves against Cook County, another one just against DuPage County, another one against the private sector. I don't think that that's appropriate. If we're looking at comparable counties based on a matrix, then that should be the measure across the board. That's just Cliff. But I do want to acknowledge my bias on that. I also want to acknowledge that there are outside of our purview in some areas, yet also inside on others, there were departments and countywide offices that did give bonuses that I don't know what we're calling those. End of year retention, swell person, whatever it is. But on this end of year stuff, we need to acknowledge that some of the employees that we have did receive an end of year stipend, and some of them sizable. And that has to be weighed into some of the comps, because was that a bonus? Was that a catch up? We should acknowledge that certain departments did receive it. Other departments did not. So there's a lot that goes into it, but we did the very best we could to come up with a plan to be rolled into the larger picture for budgeting, to say, if we're looking at equity adjustments, you're looking in the first year of about $200,000 for those employees that we outlined, 150 in the second year, 150 in the third year, but that should really bring us to today's standard. Not, I don't know that we had the ability to project what 3 years out will be ahead or behind. This is the best we could do with the data we have at a snapshot in time today.
Question?
Oh, yes.
And I will answer questions to the very best of my ability. The staff person that I worked with to put this together is not available today.
My question, Cliff, is that, as I understand it, then some of the departments use different points of comparison, but your work was all based on the McHenry Lake.
That would be correct.
Okay.
Yes. Any other questions or discussions on this?
Cheppy here.
Vern.
First off, I really appreciate this data, and I think in some cases it is very glaring. In other cases, it's not. Okay, it shows that we've actually done a much better job
Doing okay in some areas.
in pay equity than I had thought we did.
Yep.
Okay, to say that we want to base our salaries on what other counties do, it kind of just gnaws at me. I'm just not comfortable with that. Okay.
You have a suggestion on another basis of comparison for this? Honestly,
I think the report comparison is fine.
Okay.
Okay. And as I say, I'm really glad to get it. Okay. But to say that an individual is making so much less or so much more than a comparable position in another county, okay, does not necessarily mean that we should adjust that compensation one way or the other.
okay.
Right? This tells me that, as I said, we're in much better shape in many areas than I thought we were.
Taint that for this subset.
I said in
Yep.
many areas than I thought we were.
Yep.
Okay, so I wouldn't like to see us just come up with some blanket program to say we're going to do, salary increases based upon this, okay? I think we have managers that also know the personnel, okay? And whether the personnel may or may not be up to snuff, I don't know. But I noticed that overall in IT, for example, not picking on any particular department, in IT, they were pretty much in line. And, maybe that's because the IT department's done a great job with that. A couple of other departments are not quite in line.
Agreed. Vern, one of the things we did was we tried to go out to Indeed.com and say, all right, what are you basing your ranges on? And what should we be basing? And how do we mimic that, if you will? What's best practices to come up with this? And I don't know that we're ever, if you have 30 people in a room, 100 people in a room, I don't know that we're going to get consensus on it. We did the best we could with the data that we had. So hopefully you find it useful.
Understandable, but I just wouldn't want to start basing budget numbers based upon strictly these comparisons.
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman Ford,
Just a minute, Mr. Ford. We're on item B of our agenda.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Ford,
thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, somehow we have to base the range of salaries compared to something. I like the comparison that was done. I do agree that they all got to come from the same sources. The thing about it is also the population, because we're looking at as a county of what people deal with. If somebody's in a smaller county, I don't, are in a very large county, the comparison should be looked at based on that. As far as what was said earlier with individual employees, then to me, that's separate than come up with actual range of what that position should be paid by. I hope I made myself clear.
Mr. Ford, when we started this, when we started this back 6-8 months ago, maybe even a year now, part of my goal was to make sure that we weren't just looking at this from a 10,000-foot view, but if there was a department that needed to be really realigned or check their charter or something like that. And I think Roger's, yeoman work, in purchasing and grounds has really proven that, we do have some areas where a total reorg was required. And again, I am not hesitant to say, I believe Roger's presentation said, he needed $500,000 more than was there. But when you neglect certain, maintenance type issues, the cost it's tough to make it a 1-to-1 ratio or scenario or dial that in. But the savings in one is ancillary to savings in another, or spending in one is, does it make sense what I'm saying?
Yes.
I mean, we really needed to look at some of the departments and do like an analysis of them, not just dive in. And then once we dove in, how do you make it fair? And that's what we endeavored. So.
Okay.
Mr. Leonard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, I'd like to thank Mr. Surges for this. I like the detail. I mean, it gives us a very clear example comparing to two other counties, one of which is larger, one of which is smaller. It gives us a comparison to those two other counties. And quite honestly, in business, if you have an insurance business, you look at comparable insurance businesses so that you can have a comparison. Not that that's the whole criteria, but it has to be a consideration. My question for Mr. Surges is, number one, you said there were 223 people, only 115 needed adjustments, including 6 department heads. I know we have under collective bargaining agreements, a little over half of the employees in collective bargaining agreements or labor negotiations. How about the other people?
But you said that your
Help me.
universe did not include the union people, right?
So the union people were
No, I don't
taking,
want but we have what, 1,300 and some employees.
so
if
these
you-
are the figures that you have on this paper. There are 223
That are non-union,
that are non-union.
everybody else is union.
Yes.
Okay.
And again, this doesn't include the elected.
Yeah, this does not include the elected offices. These are in
So this doesn't
control.
Yeah,
include the-
well, that's 6 or whatever, it's not a big
Right.
deal. But
Well, but
Well,
you're
that is a big
covering
deal when you look
400
at
out of
the-
the 1,300.
When you look at the state's attorney's office, you look at the sheriff's office,
they're not,
they're not in here.
They're not
okay,
included in this.
that's.
The
that was my
county,
point,
again,
yes.
so to my point the other day, I am truly struggling at how to articulate those things that are within the county board's control and those things that are the elected officials' control, meaning elected officials, meaning county-wides, not us. And I don't know how to articulate that and make it sound like I know what I'm doing.
Well, Cliff, I think you're doing a fine job. I guess my concern is any raise outside of a collective bargaining agreement is going to have to be approved. And in fact, a collective bargaining agreement will have to be approved by the board. So they can give any requests they want, but we as a board are going to vote on any increase.
Oh,
So,
they're coming, sir.
we know that, but
This is what we can control within our group for your consideration.
Our department heads. My apologies. This is simply for our department heads. This is
not the elected officials.
not the elected
department, yes.
officials.
Right.
Am I correct? Then again, because I'm getting confused again, is that the universe of the 200 some employees and the proposed compensation adjustment, whatever we call it, that does not affect any union employee
Correct.
and any employee of a elected official.
Correct.
So that covers 200 out of our 1,300.
223.
Yeah, out of our, so, okay.
Correct. That is accurate.
And I guess my question, and maybe this was what Vern was alluding to, maybe not, but when you look at other counties, sometimes a similar title turns out to be different. I had a little knowledge that for years Lake County's finance department was vastly larger than ours. And somebody who might have the same title was doing maybe more at a different level in Lake County than here. But I also was very impressed with the breadth and depth of your analysis. And I think it's very, very useful because a lot of the stuff we're just, doing anecdotal things and not really knowing what we're doing. So thank you for that.
And if I can throw a plug out, Miss Labrillo,
Mhm,
just tremendous asset. And this was done in-house. This was not commissioned out. We did not pay an outside service to do this. And I think this is at the same quality level that we would have
Agreed.
done outside.
Better, but
She was incredibly thorough and very detailed oriented with this. And I believe to answer your question, Mr. Shepro, that she did dig into the job descriptions if there was a question on what that job description entailed. So she tried to do the best she could with those two counties to make sure that the comps are truly comparable to what our job requirements are.
And she's really fun to spar with because if you're looking for a yes man type of employee, she's not it. I mean, you can have dynamic conversation and state your case. She'll state her case. We try and reason. I disagree with this. I agree with that. Let's try and find an answer. And that's why some of these things take a little time because
Did you do this one?
yeah, I did.
It's-
Yeah. So
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Mr. Surges, I think this is great. As I said before, I think on the very first page, there's just one little mistake, and that's under current methodology and statistics. On the bottom of that first section, it says $498,221 per year in adjustment. Actually, that's a 3-year accumulation.
3-year.
Where are you seeing that one?
Right here.
The top, right there, the one you have highlighted,
Seventh line down.
The one I have in yellow,
198,221.
that is that's Bill, that's why I highlighted it.
Okay, yeah. I was gonna say, I looked at that. and
I
said
do,
it's gotta
I
be
have,
3
I
year.
have it highlighted. That is the 3-year accumulation.
You know, this does not include our, those elected officials, employees.
Right, correct. Or the
CPI.
union people.
And nor does this include the proposed CPI. The CPI would be in addition to this.
Well, in fact,
We're
we're,
not talking CPI right now.
No,
are we?
we're not.
Yeah,
We're not.
okay.
we're not working with all the numbers. that
Yeah.
affect us from a budget standpoint, I guess is what I'm trying to.
Well,
It's literally.
one component to your master sheet that I was tasked with, and here you go.
And it's a good component, but it's 223 of 1,300.
Right, I was gonna say, that's not even,
Yeah.
20%.
But
Not
Mr.
quite.
Chairman, I would love to move on to the second item,
No.
B, and give you yet another component.
Mhm.
Per a meeting with Mark Van Kerkhoff and although Jody Wolnick wasn't there, this represents her as well. I am not as in tune with this one as I am for the first document. They are suggesting that they have need for a code enforcement type officer. And there's some discussion here from the state's attorney's office that I'll bring in, and hopefully Jamie won't jump on me, but Mark and Jody are both saying they don't have that individual built or baked into their programs now that might go out on a complaint and say, the house is falling down, the weeds are too long, the water's not running properly, blah, 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 blah. And they would like somebody, if this is the ask, sessions, they are asking to have somebody come on and do that. And they're looking at a 300, in addition to the Kane County Code, and I think I forwarded this to everybody, and property-related ordinance protecting over 7 billion in property values. The property tax revenue of Kane County for these unincorporated properties for 2021 is $8 million. 300,000 for property code enforcement is 3.5% of that revenue. Please forward this to your ad hoc committee. I believe Mark is asking for 3 people. They have a scale of salaries that would go in there. I challenged him, how is this not being done now, or who is doing it? He says there's nobody within their matrix or their flow chart that is tasked with this, which I found incredible. Who does building permits, and, is that person not doing them? And I said, okay, can give me 1 minute. I then asked Mark, I personally struggle sometimes making the jump from the outside private sector into the public sector, because I would always look at something and say, are you offense or defense? Do you generate revenue, or just, are you an expense? How does this work? And I said, Mark, in this particular case, if this person gives a fine or writes a ticket or gives a, whatever, how does that ticket get processed? How does that get paid? If you're asking for 300,000, are you writing 150,000 in tickets? So, what is it? And my point was, in looking at the Safety Act and everything that's coming downhill from that, I didn't want to add yet one more department that's adding to the state attorney's workload when they have to go through an adjudication process to clog up the gears to say, we have to come up with a way to force the payment of the penalties that these code enforcement officers may in fact levy. And I kind of looked at Mark and said, I'd be way more comfortable back burning this until we have this Safety Act stuff worked out, and until we understand a very clear process as to what the enforcement of this might look like. Because if all this is being able to say, hey, I gave out 50 tickets this month for, inadequate water, compensation, your grass is too long, stuff like that, we are going to add to an already clogged system, where I said, is there any way that this can just be a fine? And we go to an outside collection agency to bring those fines in and circumvent the state's attorney's office. And can we work that out? And, Mark kind of said that was interesting. And Ms. Mosser phoned me later that evening saying, this was my concerns. And I said, I've already addressed those. And she said, nicely done, well done. Thank you for thinking of us. So while I agree that there's a need, I'm not agreeing that we have a process. And I think that we need to look at it, but here's just another component to add into the overarching sheet that we're looking at.
Well, it's interesting. You look at all the departments as revenue generating for what they do.
It's just habit,
Some of it's clear expense, so.
just habit, so.
Mr. Shepro.
Yeah, well, a couple of thoughts about that, and some of my information is not as current, I'm sure, as the state's attorney's office have. Traditionally, the building department is a huge revenue generator. I know it was at the municipal level, not so much now with the economy downturn, but typically that was a profit center. My sense here, though, is that the problem is, and I get that we want to collect money, is that the problem is that there are all kinds of violations out there that are crying for neighbors wanting enforcement, and we don't have the personnel to go out
That's
and
what it
make
boils
those
down to.
inspections.
That's it
Absolutely
right there.
correct.
And
But Ken, they don't have the ability to enforce. So we send somebody out to slap your neighbor on the hand. Okay, big deal. I'm
Oh.
not going to listen. I'm not going to comply. I'm not
I'm gonna
do
say,
it.
they don't go out and slap
You
you
don't
on the
have
hand.
that.
They give you a ticket. You come, you enter into a almost endless adjudication process, at the end of which, and I'm dealing with this in my neighborhood, and some very good work done by the state's attorney's office, but it's got to be frustrating because you're right. I mean, if you know how to game the system as a violator, you can drag things out for years before you get to the level of having a state's attorney go into court and try to get an injunction. And then if you know anything about how to manage it, you don't show up for the first hearing. Then you get an order, oh, you got to show up at the next hearing. And then that day your attorney shows up, oh, I was just retained. I need another 60 days and so forth and so on. But I don't know. I think, Michelle, could you weigh in on that because that is a civil division, even though there are penalties, it's a civil division responsibility.
Before Michelle speaks,
Yeah.
I'm hoping that to you and my colleagues, I am presenting both sides of a problem.
Correct.
That while I understand the need for it, I see a potential problem and a department that ultimately is going to be responsible for it saying, don't you do that to us until you guys have it worked out. So I'm hoping that I'm articulating and not steering.
Well, I thought, okay, maybe I misunderstood what they were asking you for or suggesting to
They're
you.
asking for 3 people at a total cost of $300,000.
All right,
to
they
do
aren't
code
saying
enforcement.
don't give it to us till you work it out. They're saying they need them now.
They saying they leave it now. Another department, maybe the state's attorney's office, is saying, holy cow, do you realize what you're going to do to us? And the answer is, no, I don't. But I sure don't want it. It's not my intention to hit the gas to just run into a wall.
Well, or to have the pipeline clogged here instead of there.
Right.
Yeah.
So maybe it's something that we layer in maybe a little bit later as we clear this out, but they're going to have their hands full just for working out the Safety Act. And then we're going to throw this at
Right.
them.
Yeah,
This
but
is-
I get to say that in terms of what our constituents want, the loudest cries are not about the Safety Act. It's about the guy next door that's, running business or piling junk at whatever
Or
at
a
all hours
noise.
of the day.
You know, or concerts in the backyard, as
Yeah.
Chris and I are dealing with.
Code enforcement works both ways. I mean, we're saying that if no one's out investigating, a lot of code violations go on. And the only ones you hear about or the neighbors that say, hey, I got a problem here. But if you don't have someone out there as a code enforcement person, there's things going on we don't know about.
Well,
that are
and
affecting a lot of
if
people.
there's no enforcement, then the people who wouldn't violate it don't worry about
Right,
enforcement because
right.
there isn't any.
And
Mr.
I think
Chair?
it sounds like maybe all of us are suffering from this kind of thing. Because I have the same thing going up and besides the noise, there's another area. I'm not sure, would this be better referred, at least this particular problem, referred to the development department or some other department to bring it through the committee process? Because we're discussing the overall budget here. This is kind of a, is it not that it's not important? It's like, thanks for bringing it up. Let's get this. budget
Well,
done.
I agree. I think that's where it belongs because I think I understand the approaching it from a financial standpoint, but I think there are other important considerations.
And what I think the purpose, excuse me, is just, here's some numbers, as I mentioned, that we have to be sensitive to what's going to be happening with our energy costs. They're going to double or more for next year. We don't have that line item. This was presented as a $300,000 potential cost. Revenue, we haven't adjusted yet what this revenue may be for this code enforcement. But this is a potential cost, as well as the increases of payroll adjustments, equity adjustments.
What this really demonstrates is that virtually every action has additional consequences beyond just fixing that problem. If you get more code enforcement, you're going to get more code violations. And if you get more code violations, you're either going to need more administrative adjudicators or more state's attorney enforcement or all of the above. The IRS has that problem, but that's why they always announce indictments on April 15th.
Mr. Tepe?
Mr.
Compliance.
Chair, I don't think this committee needs to be concerned or needs to be involved in things that should be handled within the normal committee process. This is the
Agreed.
department- This
Hear,
is the
hear.
department
Let's
that's
move
made a
along.
request. It's somewhat similar to the presentation that Mr. Feinstock made, okay, saying they needed additional people. We need to be concerned about the disparity numbers and the budget numbers. That's,
I see this ad hoc committee as being more of an awareness kind of committee. One, we're saying, okay, we recognize there's a great number of problems. And that, but I think we need to have everybody zeroing on those, not just the finance committee, not just, the development committee, but everybody needs to be zeroing in on it. Yes.
Mr. Chairman, I think Mr. Sturgis's concerns about this are well-founded. But, I think what we should do is if this is an informational committee, then let's defer it to the proper committee, say the development committee. And, my other question is, when we come up with recommendations, not deferring to other committees, do we report directly to the finance committee then? We should with committee policy. Yes?
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
All right. I think that's kind of important too, that we have an understanding that informationally, we can refer it to whatever committee handles that area. And then with respect to recommendations, that goes to the finance
Finance
committee.
committee.
That's great. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I'll assume that if Miss Mosser's icon is gone, then I did okay.
Out to get a code enforcement officer to visit you.
So,
He turned us off?
there will be, there is another report that the state's attorney has put together that will be presented to you at our next meeting. It will also talk about payroll equity adjustments. So do be prepared for that one.
can we hear that in advance?
48 hours, sir.
Sorry, just couldn't resist.
Well, what bothers me, everything that we do, and it all boils down to a number on a budget or a number on, whether there's a requirement. And no one really gets to hear what the discussion is and what's going on. And I think that's the kind of thing we need to publicize. We need to get out rather than just the bottom number saying we need this or we can't have this or whatever. That's my feeling.
That's a good point.
I wish we could do that. I wish that could happen. And maybe that's, where we got our publication person.
So question, so question.
Okay, where are we?
Building
Item C.
management.
Charge, you
Building management.
supposed to know.
Management. We've, This Roger?
Mhm.
I got a lot of questions on this one.
Yes, sir.
Good morning, sir. So my name is Roger Fonstock. I'm with IT Department Building Management. So we're going to talk a little bit about capital improvements related to Safety Act compliance. And so if you guys can do full screen on that, I don't know if you can do that for me, just so I can, it's up,
Top right.
I don't know if you guys have that on there even. It's okay. We can do it this way. That's fine. So what we're going to talk about is some of this is extracted from the work that Terry Hunt did with the different judicial partners. There's some information about that, which is kind of a baseline, 3-year plan that they were working through. They showed costs for year 1, 2, and 3. Most of those 3-year costs were broken down by personnel. Then there's some other costs that are in there, which are related to computer equipment, software, there's construction, renovation types of things, and then there's capital. So I was asked about what types of capital improvements are going to be necessary to comply or to work through the Safety Act based on what they were presenting. So I've taken what was in the presentation and in that spreadsheet and provided and kind of organized it a little bit differently. So I hope this is clear enough to give you some ideas. And these are just options. So speaking about, getting the information early enough to consider it, this is just a presentation of options. It's not a decision you're making. So let's see if I got this thing on here. Okay. Give it a second. There we go. So this is the overview, and you're going to see I specifically wanted to make sure they're non-personnel expenses that are identified. Okay. And you'll see the types of plans. And when we look at these, the acronym soup that you see to the right-hand side, if you're not familiar with those, SAO is simply the state's attorney's office. PDO is the public defender's office. COS is court services under the judiciary. And CIC is the circuit clerk. We use those acronyms to identify the departments. It's easier than trying to spell them all out. So just so you know what we're talking about. And then we'll talk about some of the challenges and options, comparing costs, and then just to give you some ideas of what the payments look like on those types of numbers and bond rates.
Roger,
Yes, sir.
I noticed, I looked at the presentation and you've got these different options, but you don't really, other than financially, you don't say what they are. You're going to
Yeah, I'm going to explain a little bit, but I was trying to put together numbers as opposed to the
understand.
plans, because the plans really would come from architect and design, and we'd have to get specific. So these, I'll explain that. If yeah, take that off. Okay. So a little bit about how these numbers are created. You have to make some gross estimates or rough order of magnitude estimates in order to do these things. So a lot of times we look at the amount of square footage. We look at the number of people involved, the number of computers, the number of devices. So we're quantifying how many people. So when I look at construction, a lot of times we're just looking at how many square feet. If I'm looking at renovation, I might be looking at how many people are we renovating office space for. If I look at computers, how many computers are we buying? Software is a little bit kind of one-off unique expenses. So the reason the table is highlighted the way it is because the items to the left are generally items that were fixed in Terry Hunt's spreadsheet. So those are no different than what you already received. The items highlighted in yellow and to the right are the items that I made my own modifications to. So my table looks a little bit different than Terry's. I organized the departments down the left-hand side, or the offices, I'm sorry, offices and departments. The title above the chart describes what you're looking at. So these are the preliminary numbers from May 24th Committee of the Whole. This was what was shown in that meeting with partial information. And I say partial information because the construction and capital costs weren't really defined for renovating offices or building buildings. Those weren't in there. Public Defender had a quote or a rough order quote for their office build out. And that was included. That's the number that you see in the yellow part for Public Defender. And Kane Cam offered a build out number, which was in that original spreadsheet. So this was what was shown at committee of the whole last time.
So what goes into capitals?
So capital is capital construction. That's us building office space or a building. Construction is usually renovating office, which is like office furniture, FF&E.
Okay, so construction is renovation, capital is new construction.
Generally, yes, that's kind of the description. Yeah, and for their sake, I think they put those numbers in there to describe one side is capital, building out the space, the other side is equipping it and putting furniture in it. And, so that was what was done originally, and then I took the liberty to extend this across a couple different options and scenarios, just to kind of give you an idea of what this looks like. And so one of the slides that I wanted to provide was the kind of the raw square footage of what you're dealing with. And these numbers reflect that. So this was the revised for construction and just renovation based on the number of people that they're saying they're adding to each office. And so we took the cost estimates from the architect and engineer that we had from existing office estimates for renovation and splitting offices and adding furniture. And most of those renovations are coming out to about $30,000 per FTE to renovate office space and split them and put in the cubicles and all the electrical and rework it. So we have about 61 people in that 3-year period that are showing up in that chart that Terry Hunt provided through the partners. So if you look at the expense of construction, that's reflecting the number of people that were being added in each department multiplied by $30,000 to renovate office space, provided we have enough space to do that. And we've been looking at that with the offices and working with an architect to see how many people can you pack into a space that's, I'm going to say, is already overcrowded.
We don't have any code enforcement officers. There's no limit.
I'll let you decide that. So I did leave the existing numbers that were there for CANCOM and Public Defender. So if you look at the state's attorney's number, which was probably the larger of the numbers, that is simply 61 employees multiplied by 30, which is what was in Terry Hunt's table. Okay. And if you look at the others, the circuit clerk had, a multiple of employees they wanted to add, court services. And I know that some of them don't need, office space constructed, but they probably need to renovate, add cubicles, add furniture, add electrical, add data. That's the type of thing that you're talking about in those spaces. So this was just renovating existing space. It didn't involve any specific buildings or construction of buildings. And it assumes that you could find enough space to move people into these.
Okay, Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
Could I ask Mr. Feinstock a question? On the V2 slide, in the yellow where you have construction, capital, and totals, I understand the construction. What is the capital totals?
Yeah, that's actual construction within the office space that they would need to change the structure internally, as opposed to just renovating. And the reason the numbers for Public Defender and CANCOM didn't change is because I don't know what they were talking specifically about constructing, but they were estimates provided by an architect. So I left them in place and assumed that, we could work through that later, but it's just, I know if I have to build out the space for the people involved at $30,000 per office, or per FTE, that's the rate that you would find. The capital construction, those things, sometimes they involve things that are unrelated to FTEs. They're like, whether it's a workspace or storage space, or, they have a lab that they want to create for videos. So those types of things were kind of left in place. You'll see in the next slide, I started to change that information, but this was just renovation types of numbers. And it's not to be scientific. Don't get me wrong. There's a way to do some kind of large rough order of magnitude. So you get the idea of, hey, if we had enough space, we could start renovating versus we don't have enough space and we need to talk about buildings. So the next options are going to start talking about buildings and how you go about doing that. So, historically, going all the way back to probably the time that I've been here 20 years, the counties had different discussions about the judicial center campus and master planning and the things that need to be done at the courthouse and St. Charles Township. So this is dealing with a new building that would address the square footage for state's attorney, public defender, court services only. So what was said in the meeting, and I was trying to catch on to like what their projections were, was that they thought they needed almost 200% of the space that they have now. If they grow by 60 people overall, and they have, they're really packed into the space they have now, adding 60 people and then how much space would be compounded by what their current conditions are anyway. I would use an example for the multipurpose building as well, that most of those spaces when we moved increased by more than 200%. They were closer to 300%. So it's an interesting comparison. I'm not saying, it's scientific, but the fact of the matter is that when you move into a new space, you want it to be, a perfect fit, or, do you want to be able to spread out a little bit better, have more room? If you have an attorney that's working in literally a 6x6 cube with all their paperwork surrounding them, or do you want them to have file cabinets and storage and things like that? That's the difference. But so this is based on those three offices. The offices right now, I would tell you that state's attorney's office in the judicial center is what I'm looking at. That office is about 18,000 square feet. And this would be proposing to create a 36,000 square foot space. The other two are about 14,000 square foot each. So you'd be creating two 28,000 square foot spaces. And that's where the 92,000 square feet comes from. This does not address the circuit clerk's office in any way. And the other question that you have from this, which would be logical, is if you build a new office building that's large enough to fully accommodate these three offices, what do you do with the existing space? Because
No, he answered my question.
yeah, we're going to talk about that. There's some other options that kind of deal with that, because you do have, the existing, let's say, 46,000 square feet in the building that they occupy currently. So think of it that way. They have 46,000 square feet that they occupy currently. And if you said, I want to build a brand new building for them at 92,000 square feet, which is double the size, and put them in it, then you have the vacuum of what did you leave behind and what do you use it for? So that's a important aspect. And I'll talk about that in a little bit, because there's a question about, does their office need to be together? Can you split it? Can you have them in two places? I think from an operational perspective, they would prefer not to do that. I'm not speaking for them, but I just have heard that.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
Question for Mr. Fostak. You may not be able to answer this, but I know a big part of the Safety Act for the state's attorney's office and the public defender's office is the fact that they're going to have to monitor all of the body cameras and everything else. So any instance where they have a case, they're going to have to review the full thing. Is that something that could be done remotely? In other words, could some of these additional people be hired and work from their homes or remotely?
I think that's a policy question for the state's attorney's office, because of the confidentiality, privacy issues. They probably, so many things that would have to be really well thought out. I don't think we're there yet.
Okay.
So seems have possibilities. There's technology, but then you also have a lot of issues when somebody is not in an office with supervision. That could be a challenge.
Absolutely.
Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you, Shepro. I mean, I think it would be very instructive for some of us if they have room for a tour to actually
Absolutely.
visit some of the state's
Sure.
attorney's offices and see what's going on there. And not only do we need to have enough space, again, we're not talking about building spacious, huge offices, but it's difficult to attract people to come here and work if they are looking forward to a metal desk in a hallway between the water cooler and the bathrooms, and even without regard to whether or not that meets code. Many years ago, I was offered a job in the Manhattan District Attorney's Office at the time when the city was broke. And I learned that they didn't have any offices. You had a desk in the hall. You had to pay for the witnesses, out of your own pocket because they didn't have any money for witnesses. And the starting salary wasn't so great. And it was hard to get people who would want to get into that circumstance. And we've heard before about if these new employees, most of the attorneys are not going to be people who just passed the bar exam. The need is for people at a much more experienced level. And you've got to offer them some reason to want to come to you. And while I'm not saying spacious office is there, I think they have to be realistic. But the problem I have is that when I read about construction nowadays, first off, a new building is what, 3 to 5 years by the time you've gone through all the hoops you have to jump through. And that's without regard to, I think we all know projects locally that have sat for a year or more because they can't get the pipe they needed because it's somewhere in Taiwan or it's in a warehouse in San Francisco. If this is really an immediate need, seems to me saying in 5 years we'll have a great new building is not going to be the answer either.
Mr. Berman?
Yes.
So Ken, I would hope, and Roger, I would hope that we're looking at all options for this, including, say, a certain vac site, Sam's Club or whatever that was that you may be.
We'll talk about
available.
that in a few more slides.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and Ken, just to let you know, in my interview with Miss Mosser, trying to dial into some of this and not doubting anything, but just trying to understand something as simple as saying, you really need somebody with the bar exam to review footage on a body cam, but this body cam footage is coming from everybody everywhere and the volume is going to be incredible. And the answer is they don't need somebody. They need somebody to identify this area who then hands it off to somebody who's passed the bar exam, who then has enough ability to do it. So now it's 4 layers deep.
Well, you're right. I'm not
Just
sure
to
that
get-
that's a saving in expertise.
I mean, it's like, holy
It's just
tamale.
adding
Yeah.
to the chain. No, you're right. I mean, you need a photo interpreter more than you need someone with
Well-
great knowledge of constitutional or tort law.
And I think this is Roger again, in their analysis, they do provide for like evidence technicians and then analysts. They're not talking about all attorneys necessarily. So there's a lot of kind of different estimates about what that takes to do. I provided a couple estimates to the attorneys about how much it takes to process video and how many people, you have like people hours. And if you're watching an hour's worth of video, it takes an hour because you don't watch it and fast forward, you're watching it for an hour. And then you have somebody that cuts it down to the 5 minutes of relevant stuff. And that can be done by an evidence technician that's got the right instruction, right tools. And we don't have to have a bunch of attorneys trying to deal with watching 3 hours of video. And
New
that's good.
avocation.
To find the evidence technician.
One other thing real quick, Mr. Chairman, that was mentioned was about the space and offices. One of the things that's essential and really important is that we have some privacy for the offices, for the attorneys and staff. And we don't have that. We're trying to do Zoom and remote court and a lot of things where they need to attend by video, which is great. And they can do it from their desk, but they're in a cubicle farm or an open desk, they can't do it very well. So that's been a challenge and we're having that right now.
Madam Chair.
I have had the opportunity to do a tour of the courthouse. It was quite a thorough tour. And not only is it our attorneys who are compromised, it's the individuals who need to have access to an attorney that defendants, the people who are showing up to court, they're in a public area. And it could be very sensitive things that are being talked about. And people are walking by for a whole different host of other reasons, and they have access to the screen. They can potentially hear what's going on, certainly hear the comments that are being made by the defendant.
Yep.
Those individuals too need to have a secure area if we're going to be doing virtual courts, so that they have a sense of privacy as well. So it's also our constituents, our community members who need to have that, which is not available right now there at all.
Ready?
Yeah.
Okay, so this, if you look at the construction for the three spaces at 92,000 square feet, and you're looking at the other spaces continuing with the $30,000 per person for renovation, you get a total of $46 million. And that's based on the three offices getting a new space at 92,000 square feet, $500 per square foot, which is based on estimates from Will County's recent construction and our recent construction. So we'd use that number as a guide. If you do the math, you multiply 36,000 square feet for the state's attorney's office by $500 a square foot, you get $18 million. Same for the other numbers. And the smaller numbers are based on $30,000 of renovation per employee or FTE counts that were added. So $46 million is what this new building, and then you have the available space in the judicial center, which are the I would say you have the western wing of the judicial center, which was originally built to at some point transition into courtrooms. It's built out as office space now. It was designed similar to the courtroom so that it could be redone or retrofitted. I'm not saying that's a good idea, but you would have that space to look at. So the other one is you do the full, building of a building. This is one of the things that was discussed in 2014. And this is kind of when we were doing master planning, where the master planning, I think, came to a stop and said, this is getting to $80 million. I'm not sure where we're at financially, but they kind of stopped at this point and put a lot of this on hold. This was the state's attorney's office, public defender office, court services, or state's attorney, public defender, and court services, plus the CIC, or the circuit clerk building, which is the north campus portion of the building occupied by the circuit clerk. It is about 50,000 square feet of office space, loading docks, storage area, everything combined. So now you're at 92,000 plus 50,000. You're at 142,000 square feet in a new building. You still have the space in the judicial center that you'd have to determine if you want to, repurpose it, courtrooms, what do you need? It's a lot of space to vacate at 48,000 square feet or 46,000 square feet. This would involve a new building on the judicial center campus. Like I said, about 142,000 square feet at 71 million. And I would advise this does not include any costs for the bonding and financing and the any contingency. It's just kind of straight per square footage costs.
Or fixtures.
Yeah, I did include FF&E. Yeah, it's included in the $500. That's a total all-in price from two other construction projects that we've been following. One is Will County Courthouse. We're following that, and then we have a couple of our own construction projects that we're just using the average cost per square foot when we finish.
Isn't there something on the master plan from years ago for that building?
Yes, that's where I was talking about. When it stopped, we were at about $80 million, I think, back then. And it included some other attributes that I'm not taking into account, but we're revisiting the master plan now. So that could be, this could easily grow when you add some of those other features. You say, okay, well, I'm looking at this, I'm adding more employees. We're adding more people to the parking lot. We need a parking garage or a structure. Maybe you build a structure that has, 2 layers of parking garage and some offices above it with a nice skyway walk across over to the judicial center, and it's all connected. Those are options. They've looked at creating a new entrance, which would be off of the north end of the building, out in the front yard, essentially, And that would involve changing the entire front entrance of the building somewhat. So there's been a lot of different options. These are really to give you kind of the idea of the magnitude of what you're talking about. And I didn't, we don't have the supporting architect and design, it's just square footage. How do you multiply that out?
How much of the circuit clerk's building is just dead storage area now?
I would say they occupy a space of 25, 30,000 square feet.
I mean,
They're spread out pretty good.
That's arguably very expensive storage space.
If you look at what our market value is to sell it, probably not.
I'm not talking about selling it. I'm just talking about it
Yeah.
like it's cheaper to store it in,
Uh,
Sycamore than it
yes.
is on Randall.
Yeah, at retail, that's probably, $15 to $20 square foot space. At, warehouse prices, $5 to $8 a square foot.
And I got another question I had was, how much space does the arbitration center take up at Third Street?
I believe they have a courtroom and one office.
That's all? Okay, I had the idea that it was like that entire wing on the second floor.
No, I don't believe so either. Yeah, I know they have one chamber and they have one courtroom.
That's, I think, an annual contract.
Yes.
And it occurs to me that the arbitration doesn't need a judge. It wouldn't have to be at Third Street. It's just the attorneys don't want to have to get in their car and go somewhere else. Anyway.
Happy.
Yes, sir.
Oh, yes. Can I request a tram between the two buildings?
Mario.
Okay, but in all seriousness, in my mind, I'm dividing this into two problems. One, I don't think there's any doubt that we need to build a new building. The only question is when and how big.
Yes,
But
sir.
I don't think the building of a new building in any way solves the problem. It just gives us budgeting issues. We have a transitioner problem where all of these departments are going to be faced with space needs that,
Yep.
start beginning in October, November, and, where are they going to put them in the meantime? So that's a whole second set of problems to be dealt with. But
303 and find out what happened to all those trailers that they used.
We're fine. But it's a
So-
serious, this is a serious conversation that we have to have because we
Yeah.
need temporary, there has to be a long-term plan and a short-term
Yes.
solution.
So.
I still want that tram.
Respective, the one thing that's interesting is the renovation budgets and the work that's done in the offices is kind of the short-term plan right now. Or the other alternative is if you can survive with offices in separate locations, you could potentially repurpose some space at Third Street Courthouse that maybe you can, move tenants out of, or you could get some office space and lease it short-term. But if you want a long-term solution that's beyond the 3-year horizon, you need to start planning, and that's the challenge. And so when you look at these numbers, some of these are pretty large numbers, and this is just the intro to that conversation. I think the short-term planning, I think Terry and the offices, Terry Hunt and the offices that worked with him, I think their estimates outside of the renovation, other things, if those are all to come to pass in the next 1 to 3 years, the renovation, a lot of that space rework will become required. We'll have to start working on renovating and making those things work, because you're right. You cannot build a building, probably 2 years is the fastest. More than likely it's 3. 3 years is probably typical. So this third, the fifth option that we have, I think I just finished up on the kind of the full 142,000 square feet. This one is appealing because it involves taking, public defender's office, court services, and circuit clerk and putting them in a building, but having the state's attorney's office take over the remainder of the space in the judicial center. So you're not having any open space. You're building a building for the circuit clerk, court services, and public defender next door or adjoined. State's attorney would be able to accommodate them through the space that the public defender and court services would be vacating, and circuit clerk's building, which is that 50,000 square feet, would be available to us for the open space, or to have some space to do some things. And there's another plan where we just use exactly the amount of square footage that we need. So I'll do that one next.
Deputy here. So maybe the plan would be to take departments and move them to some temporary area and only do one renovation for the state's attorney.
Again, Vern, Surges here.
Yes, sir.
Again, I am hoping that major portions of this legislation, wind up getting modified and we realize that it's just not viable at this point in time.
Yeah.
Or that the state comes up with the funding that's appropriate.
Sure.
You can't roll this thing downhill and expect everybody to absorb this. This is not reasonable.
Yeah,
State-
but
the state
with
is not-
technology and cell phones and all the video that everybody shoots now, it has to be looked at.
The state is not going to be able to.
I
do
talked
that.
yesterday with one member of the General Assembly, admittedly of the minority party, but he said he senses that there is no movement toward any substantial change.
That's my fear.
Yeah. In fact, I think the state ended up with like $83 million that they didn't expect. And he had put in a bill that would use that to help local governments cover the costs of the cameras, and that went nowhere.
This version 6, Mr. Chairman, is what would be exactly matching up to their office needs. It involves having their offices split to a new building, which would be an annex or like an additional building on the campus. So they're not in the same specific office spaces, but on the same campus, adjoined to the judicial center as I would see it. But this is 50,000 square feet, and that would be the 200% increase in space. It does involve the split, and that's, just covering the exact space that they're asking for and using the existing space that they're in.
Now would involve some temporary relocation.
Well, we would be building out and probably accommodating the people as they're onboarding them in the next 3 years.
I seem to recall that there was a period of time when the civil division was exiled to that.
Mr. Shepro, your microphone,
I'm
please.
sorry, that there was a time when the civil division was evicted to the building in the parking lot
The annex,
for quite a while.
the old court, the 3rd Street Courthouse Annex
Yeah.
building. It was a garage.
Yeah.
So this one, the construction 23 million is, a lower number. And I think that's because we're trying to use all the existing space and add space at the same time. But I think that the challenge is in the vision of what you see at the Judicial Center campus. Do you see having these buildings that are kind of purpose-built for offices and they adjoin to the building? Or are you looking at kind of a master plan of how you want the campus to function long-term and building, a larger plan? So these are some of the challenges. Again, the state's attorney's office is at capacity, public defender, court services are near capacity. I think they're in a little bit, maybe, I don't even know if I want to say a little bit better shape, but similar condition. If you go in, you'll find people that are packed into cubicles with their work around them.
Aisles.
It's just around them. That's the best way to describe it. We have had some challenges with that. So the estimated need is as high as 200% in the next 3 to 5 years. That's what we're seeing. You need 200%. You're probably at, let's say, 150% of what you probably should have in a space right now. You're packed in. And I agree with Mr. Shepro. I think a walkthrough or a tour. We had asked State's Attorney Mosser if we could even shoot a quick video.
Yeah.
Just to bring it. We'll do a quick walkthrough and show you what this looks like.
I think that's a great suggestion, less invasive.
Yeah, and then you don't have to be in their space. We don't have. What's it? Oh, we were talking to Jamie about that. It wasn't our idea on our own. It was, Oh, okay. We'll take pictures of boxes. I don't know. No file numbers. no
Do it
case
at night
numbers.
when there's nobody around, the computers are off.
Yeah, and you know what? It could just be some areas where it could be some areas where we put everything away and just take some still photos of what it looks like. touring is difficult too.
Yeah.
Having, 30 people walk through, and if they're all there at the same time, I think you'd have a public meeting in your office because that's a public meeting.
Yes.
Yes. So
What if we don't discuss anything?
be a challenge. Renovation, it doesn't increase space, it creates more density. That's all I'm going to tell you. Everybody's talking about doing renovation and putting more people into 1-pound bags. It's just, we walk through those spaces, and you're talking about taking a traditional office of 10 by 12 and putting 2 people in a 10 by 12 with cubicles that'll, somehow separate them. But then you're dealing with heating and air conditioning, fire suppression. You're dealing with, all the electrical needs and data and splitting it, sound, acoustics. Renovation is a tough proposition. Short term, that may be all that you have.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
Roger, a question. With respect to these options, I understand it, and I think we all realize that we're going to have
Yeah.
to build something or buy something to create more space. Do you have any projections on cost to do these different options?
Yeah, we've worked through that. For the leasing of space is pretty, interesting because the market is pretty competitive right now. It's a seller's market, not a buyer's market. Lots of people are moving office space and industrial space fairly quickly. If you're leasing on a 5-year term, office space is anywhere from $15 to $20 a square foot. We're looking at, let's just say 50,000 square feet.
Mhm.
So 15, let's say we're the worst case scenario, $20 a square foot, 50,000 square feet, $1 million a year, plus all of the utilities and common space.
More specifically, I was speaking about new construction.
Yeah,
If we
okay.
did bonding on that.
Yes,
what
that's
might
in
be.
the 1-2 slides, and then we're
Okay,
going to be
great.
done.
Thank you.
So splitting the offices, I think is something that the state's attorney, public defender, court services, and the circuit clerk have said is always a problem. It's from having additional supervision and layers that you need to manage everybody. You're not in the same place. Logistically, a lot of their stuff is stored in one place or the other. So having them in a common site is very beneficial to them. Consolidating on the Judicial Center campus, it's always been desirable. The circuit clerk has always expressed, no matter who is elected, that they'd like to be at the Judicial Center campus and adjoined to the courts. Same for the other offices. So some of the, the construction options, I think are in the 66 million to 74 million kind of range with CIC, and you can get, lower if you're just doing exactly what's needed. Leasing building spaces that we're talking about for these 3 offices. You had $1 million worth of lease and another 0.4 for the overhead, 1.4 million a year to lease this, and you'd have to find a building that would accommodate you at 50,000 square feet of office, which I am telling you would be hard to find right now. Purchasing a building outright instead of building it yourself. So it'd be a building you find somewhere in this area, regionally close. We are seeing, the price to buy is actually less than building, but you get what you're, the building kind of as is, and you have to build it out. You might be able to buy a 50,000 square foot building for about 13.8 million, including renovations to it to make it serviceable for the offices. And that's an estimate based on price per square foot. So the other question we've had is what becomes of the former CIC offices, the circuit clerk's office? It's 50,000 square feet. If you move them out of there, it's a big space. You have a lot of potential there to use it for some other purpose, maybe other offices that are bursting at the seams, which it's beyond the judiciary. There's other offices need
Health
space. If you're building one of these buildings, do you want to have any shell space? Do you want to have any capacity above what it is that you built? I can tell you the multipurpose building was built with the idea that it was going to be bigger than anything anybody needed. It is full.
Well, I was going to ask if none of this includes other future needs.
It's just dealing with the Safety Act. So these are the options kind of side by side with all the stuff stacked. They're in your packet that was sent. Gives you kind of the variety of options. The first 2 are more the interim kind of renovation initial stuff that was presented. The last one is just the amount of space that you need to accommodate the offices that they asked about. So those are the numbers. And then I'll finish with this. This is bonding at 3%, 10, 20, 30 years. And it's different, amounts, 25, 50, 75, 100. Gives you an idea of what the annual cost to service the debt is based on 3% annual percentage. And that's all I have for right now.
Mr. Shepherd.
Thanks for making it so easy on us.
Remember that it was only months ago that we were talking about paying 0.93% on our financing. And now it's up to 3, and who knows where it'll go.
Could be higher, yeah.
Yeah. The bad thing about low numbers is an increase has a very large percentage attached to it.
Comments? Okay. Madam
So,
Chair.
this is a lot of information that we'll be folding in. And next week, we will again be talking about the state's attorney and what their pay equity looks like. And then perhaps, I'm not aware of any other additional costs. If all of our departments, I'll reach out to the specific ones. If there's anything that has been missed, we'll make sure that we get you that information in a timely manner. But I think we'll have it all after we bring in the equity for the state's attorney for your review. There was a question that I've got a definitive answer for. When do you have to, as a board, to decide if you would like to go out to referendum for the sales tax? It has to be done 79 days before the November 8th election. So as should make a vote, and I'm giving a little wiggle room now. Okay, we have a couple of days of wiggle room, but by the August 9th board meeting. So that should give this committee an opportunity then after next week to consider what options are, what you'd like to think about, and then contemplate, and then bring that back to the finance committee for their consideration and further discussion. Does that make sense?
Heavy lifting, guys. Heavy lifting.
Any other comments or questions of Roger?
I feel a little bit overwhelmed with the alternatives. And I'm not sure exactly where we're going to end up. So I need to do some thinking on this.
And if I may, I did talk to our state's attorney today about some other matters, but I brought up, what happens if the board decides that they don't want to move forward with this? Because this is substantive. I mean, this is with the Safety Act, funding the Safety Act. What? And because these are substantial numbers that we have to chew on and figure out how we're going to pay for. She said, you have to pay for it. You're just going to have to figure it out. So, and that was her legal opinion, which is an accurate opinion. So we can't skirt this at all. We have these expenses that are coming up that have been mandated by the state, and we have to adjust our budget accordingly. It's a conundrum.
Another bearer of good news.
Any other? Mr. Shepherd?
Yeah, a comment is that there have been other mandates from the state that we said we can't get it done, and we don't have the money. And so far, nobody's come after us.
Well,
So
I was
that's
thinking
something
about
to think about too.
I was thinking about your comments. I can't speak to that. I think we can only reflect on fiscal responsibility and making sure that we comply with what we are asked to do.
Mr. Leonard?
Mr. Chairman, Madam Chair, I understand what you're saying, and I agree. The mandated portion that we have to try to follow, whether we can or not, are the personnel changes, not the building. So we have to take a look at that 5.2 million and figure out how to handle that in the budget. For that, I think there are some solutions. As Mr. Tepp, you said, with respect to the building concerns, I need time to think about it and evaluate. Obviously, we're going to have to do something down the road, whether that be involved in the 23 budget or not, I don't know yet, but it's something to consider.
And I think to the point that Mr. Shepro brought up, what did you say, sir? So 0.9 was the bond, interest on the bond, and now it's at 3.
Few months ago.
And it could
And-
be 4% instead of 3%.
Yeah.
Number 8
And,
months.
and because we have now a historic 40-year inflation, I think it was 8.2, 8.6. So they are going to be raising interest rates very quickly.
That's,
So this is something that the board is interested in. Perhaps being prudent is to do it sooner than later. It'll go up
For how long?
until they can stop the inflation.
I needed told.
All right.
Four
What,
bridges.
Motion to adjourn.
Fabian Parkway has a terrific.
all those in favor of adjourning?
Aye.
Aye.
Road, I think, by the east.
Opposed?
You don't have to use them.
All right.
Is it?
God, I don't know.
You're only going to guarantee us that rate for a certain
I
period.
feel so.
Chairman,
Yes, sir.
Forest Preserve District at all?
We have mental services available for board members.
Right
I
now.
could, why?
Yes.